Welcome back, and thank you very much for participating, for contributing, for liking and subscribing so that you can get some updates. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave it a week before I updated you with the next edition, another part of the book. A couple of viewers have asked what makes me qualified to speak on this topic. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes before I start reading, just to fill you in, just for those who don't know my background, who haven't gone to my about page on the horsesaddlerider.com website. I have spent 25 years as a veterinary physiotherapist, a graduate human sports therapist, and that included health and sports psychology. I was actually one of the first to do psychology as an A-level in the UK. So that was many decades ago. So psychology has always been a strong focus for me. What motivates people to do what they do or don't do. I achieved a first for my sports therapy degree, and currently I'm in my final year of a professional doctorate on the topic of rider posture, pain and performance. I've owned horses, I've competed in dressage and showing. I've written a couple of books. One is a novel and has an equestrian focus, and that's for young adults, but older ones would enjoy it too. And I've also written a textbook, and you'll find over 200 videos on my channel on the topic of ethical training of the horse and rider as a combination. I have not renewed my membership of 3 professional bodies, of which I was a member for many years, as of April this year, because I need to detach myself in order to say what I want to say about the industry, because I want to see some changes. And if we don't all talk about what these changes should be, we're not going to get them. So I'm fortunate in that I'm not likely to offend any of my professional body memberships. So before I continue with the book extracts about the impression I get from Charlotte Dujardin's own words, I want to take a few minutes to read a couple of comments stated here after the first video was posted. So if you don't want to hear that, then skip on to my reading of the book. So Jennifer states, there is no way to train any horse without abusive tactics to perform a correct piaffe. And Jen is a former FEI judge, and she competes with her stallions, I believe it is. She's a retired paramedic and a horse trainer. And this is in response to the comment that Charlotte made in her book, that she taught as an apprentice. So as a young rider, she taught a horse how to piaffe in 2 weeks, even though an advanced rider and trainer stated that that horse could not do it. So she didn't explain how she managed to train that horse in 2 weeks. So Jen goes on to say, it's impossible. It takes, at least in my experience of training horses, to piaffe from the ground first, applying pressure where my leg will be, at least a month, then from the saddle to get a decent looking piaffe, another month or more. And that's just my experience of over 30 years of training dressage to horses that will be just Prix Saint Georges horses, not including the cross-country horses who also have to master this for their dressage test. The only way to get it done in 2 weeks is by being on the ground with the horses bridled up. I'm not going to read what she says because I wouldn't want anyone to repeat this. And the whipping at the legs of the horse as you get them to slow down and sit on their haunches, which is similar to what I saw in Charlotte's abuse video, although that looked very much like punishment rather than teaching. It's no wonder when asked to show how she did it, the horse kicked out. She had made that horse terrified of the lunge whip or dressage whip, which is also used. It disgusts me. And a few more comments. I replied, yes, I wonder what made her think she could do it, and especially when another advanced rider presumably tried to teach that horse. It's telling me that the horse reacted to being touched by the whip and bucked her off. She didn't explain even briefly how she succeeded, and it's astonishing that the word pain is never once mentioned in this book. She does actually mention her own back pain and Carl Hester's back pain, but not of the horses. And this commenter says, really makes you wonder, doesn't it? And what were her mother's training practices as well? That's another question that would need to be addressed. And consistency is key to training horses. Consistency of rider load, we were talking about there. And clearly the mother was approving of this behaviour. Winning was everything and what they paid for. Thanks for your effort to search for the origins of misbehaviour in people. A kid can't be blamed for what is taught, but at a certain age should come a point of questioning what was learned. Maybe if you are successful, there's no reason to question anything. Good point. And another comment, it's wild to see comments on here that are acting as if this is misconstruing her words. It's all written very plainly. She grew up with normalized abuse. She grew up being taught to do anything to win. She grew up with the mindset that training horses was about fixing it, and her methods tell a story that does not line up with the ethical view. Why are people so quick to act like anything they feel discomfort with is somehow being intentionally spun that way? You are just afraid of the truth. Great comment. In no way am I blaming CD for her upbringing, as that was outside of her control, but in no way does that mean she's free from consequence of her actions as an adult who should know better. Thank you for making this video. I didn't have access to this book, so seeing a review of it has helped me understand the situation more. I'd like to say it's my pleasure, but unfortunately it hasn't been. Another comment, I'm just shocked. What about Carl Hester in all this? And another comment in response, Carl Hester had nothing, in capital letters, to do with this case. The CDJ video was filmed at her own yard. He was as shocked as we all were. And from what I see, Carl typically selects what he describes as hot horses, those that are sharp enough to ping through the movements. They're willing, forward-thinking, confident types of horse. Types that can only have the lightest of pressure applied, or they would retaliate strongly. It's awful that he's now being thought of as using or even teaching the same techniques. It would be interesting to find out if she's dropped in on him since. And I'm not sure whether they have any jointly owned horses. So yeah, it would be interesting to see what Carl's response to this was. And if there's still a partnership there, if they still jointly own horses. And another one, definitely staying tuned for more tea, please. Serve it hot. Oh, I will. And I always enjoy your videos as they make me really think. Well done. Thank you. All families are dysfunctional, and so all that is learnt from parents are passed down to children. These behaviours become ingrained on the child, and the child will learn from these behaviours and parent their children in the same or similar ways. Generational parenting. So it is interesting, the parent-child dynamics here in this book, written by Charlotte, not me. So it can be argued that her mother was very dominant in her and her sisters' lives and in the training methods of their ponies. CD would have seen and experienced her mother and others using questionable training methods, which CD has continued to use throughout her pony horse training. Also learnt manipulation to others by CD as well to get what she wants. By calling her ponies it, to me shows a total lack of care and love for her pony and the welfare of her pony. Horses and ponies are sentient beings. They are not a motorbike that can be turned on and off by a switch. All horses are different. Some may not have the body to carry out movements asked of them. Some may not have the brain, and there are those who may have physical illness. By not being able to recognize possible issues and trying to resolve them, that is where the abuse begins and continues. So, yes, I do maintain that CD is no horse trainer, because having studied for a degree in that topic, it's all about conditioning, it's all about learning, it's all about learning styles, it's about getting the most out of the athlete to motivate them to go on to try harder. And that's certainly the experience that I had with my horses. And to make competing comfortable, or to make training, to make conditioning comfortable for them, because we all know when we start conditioning our muscles, it hurts. It is the same for the horses. So, yeah, turn the heat lamps on when they're finished, give them a massage, reward them for their effort so that they will want to come and apply themselves to their training the next session. I think it's sobering and helpful to remember the words of Jesus, "Ye without sin cast the first stone." Well, yes, that obviously is directed at me, and obviously little misconstrued there, because this is why I question those who put CD in that situation without stopping her actions. She's not the sole perpetrator here as I see it. To me, it's a whole lot worse when a child is involved and the adults are in this case accountable and have a duty of care to safeguard. So that's where that quote comes from in the Bible. It means that if you want to hold one accountable, you have to hold the other parties involved accountable as well. I'm not the other party. I'm simply the messenger with some opinions of which I have a right to air. We need to take a look at the risks of children in sport and who is safeguarding them. I've provided therapy to children and have come across a number of situations where winning takes precedence over a child's well-being. And these are children that have been in pain, where their parents have called me out to treat them, and I almost have to negotiate with them on this about their return to sport. Now, that's your child. Your child may have tennis elbow, for example, and they need to stop playing sport. But if they've got some competitions coming up, I've known the school to put the parent under pressure for the child to step up and don't let the team down. So that is real. And another comment to my comment, I could not agree more with you. Parents seeing themselves in their children. I see it frequently when I volunteer for stewarding duties at show jumping competitions for the under 18s. I call it out whenever I see it. Hey, great. And yes, I and others receive abuse. But as you are going to, I serve the tea to them and it's scolding. Yeah, I think we all need to have a contingency here so that we need to know what we are going to say and we need to rehearse and practice it. If you see a horse or a child being mistreated in the equestrian world, or anywhere for that matter, but we're on the topic of equestrianism, practice some role play with your friends. How are you going to address this situation? If you're going to confront somebody, how are you going to do it? Because that information isn't out there. And yeah, you can be vilified for whistleblowing. I know this very well. But you still have to, if you say you love horses and care for them, and children for that matter, and they have no voice and they are vulnerable, you need to have a plan in place to address that. Whether it's confrontation on the spot or whether you decide to speak to somebody about it, it needs to be said. But yes, I do agree, most whistleblowers face a backlash for trying to stop abuse. So we need a way of doing it without emotion, so that at the time it comes across as not vengeful. And yeah, there's not much we can do with abusers to make it stop. But the organisers of these competitions and whoever's facilitating the abuse does have that duty of care. Okay, so let's go on to the book. So at this point, we've done the 20 years and below, and we come on to the topic of Valegro and how she got the ride and what happened next. I think there may be a couple of more installments to this reading because, yeah, I don't think I'll be finishing it today. The first time I saw Valegro was at Addington in the summer of 2006. He was being ridden by Carl Hester, if you didn't know, who also owned him. And I can honestly say I was blown away. Most of us are when Carl rides. His canter was huge, absolutely huge. And even though it looked a bit out of control, he looked like he'd be so much fun to ride. That is something I notice about young horses as I'm treating them, is yes, they come across as being out of control, unbalanced, but if they've been bred to show a lot of expression in the gait, then they don't have the necessary levels of proprioception to be able to control their dynamic posture. So it can come to as a bit of a shock to the horse as well. One of the things that immediately jumped out about him was the way he was built. He was a complete and utter powerhouse. Nowadays, you see a lot of thoroughbred type dressage horses with very elegant long legs, but Valegro was much more of an old-fashioned, stocky stamp. And as I say, young horses may look strong and athletic, but they're not. It's an illusion. They're not strong and athletic with a rider on their back until sometime later in their conditioning process. Even then, he looked like he only wanted to please. I saw him again a few months later at the Nationals. He won the Shearwater 4-year-old championship, presumably with Carl. I was so desperate to do well, and for Des, which was her horse, young horse, to do well. But when Carl actually did come over and ask if he could have a sit on him, that was her horse, I was lost for words. Then I looked down and saw the spurs Carl was wearing. They weren't sharp, but they were quite long. Fernandez, being as sensitive as he was, I was a bit taken aback. But I couldn't exactly tell Carl Hester to be careful with his legs. After a bit, Carl came back, dismounted and handed me Des's reins. He's very sensitive, he said, but the overall verdict was that Des was a lovely horse, that I'd done a super job of training him, and that he showed great potential for the Grand Prix work, including Piaf. The next time I saw Carl was at an Addington Premier League show, and it was then that Mum approached him to ask if he'd consider giving me some lessons. I made her do it because I was too afraid to do it myself. Well, how did she make her mum ask Carl if she could have some lessons? And also, this is the first insight into the fact that right place, right time, right horse perhaps, and ducks lined up. And then, as luck would have it, Carl's head girl, Caroline Dawson, was going on holiday for 10 days. And if I wanted to, could bring Fernandez and be a temporary working pupil. I wouldn't get paid. In those days, you could use children as slaves for stable duties, and often they would work all day just for a sit on a horse at the end of it. As it turned out, I went for 10 days and never came back. Chapter 5, meant to be. Well, yeah, right place, right time. Vacancy on the yard as an unpaid intern, apprentice. And from the start, Carl said that I had a gift for teaching horses the collected movements. Our mentalities were similar too. Oh, okay, so she's similar to Carl, or was at that time. I'm self-motivated and wanted to ride everything. To this day, Carl has never paid me a wage. Since I'd been working for Carl, I'd been living with Lucy in the trainer's house, who never put the heating on. And after a bit, Lucy and I decided we were going to get our own little electric heaters. So here comes the dishonesty again, which we got earlier in the book with the homework and getting someone else to do it for her, which we hid under our beds during the day so Anne wouldn't see them. We'd get them out each evening and stick them on full blast, have a shower, then literally sit in front of them, holding our towels open to try and warm up. We knew we were being naughty, and always worried in case Anne came in and wanted to know why it was so hot. So eventually we decided we'd just have to lie. We'd just have to lie. And say we'd had both of our hairdryers going. Seriously, I think it would have killed and if she'd known how much of her electricity we were actually burning. For years, I tried and tried to make Blueberry more cuddly and kissy, like Des, but he was just never that sort of horse. You'd give him a hug and he'd give you a please don't do that kind of look. He always knew what he wanted, Blueberry, and that was his own personal space. Okay, so she recognizes that there are horses who need space or don't want the rider to interact with them as much. So here you have a horse that we've been told is trainable, but who perhaps isn't too fond of people in the way that you might expect affection, perhaps, from a horse. But to me, that's a clue into the horse's character trait. And yeah, horses don't have to be affectionate. I have, in my experience, known mares to like more pampering than geldings. But it's interesting that she states it, that the horse gives her a look as if to say, back off. So Valegro was sold as a colt from the Netherlands, and Carl spotted him at the KWPN Stallion Show and grading in 2005. Even then, as Carl says, he had the head of a duchess and the bottom of a cook, which is an old saying that it's preferable to have a horse that looks good, but has a very high potential for power. But although he obviously had massive power in his hindquarters, it seemed at the time that Valegro was never going to be big and special enough to keep as a stallion for breeding. That was very unfortunate. He was gelded, castrated, and because he wasn't expensive, Carl decided to buy him. Then Valegro was turned away, kept down the road. Valegro's career had got off to a winning start with the 4-year-old championship, and he'd also won the 2006 Badminton Young Dressage Horse of the Future title, but nobody knew what would happen next. So Valegro was a young horse with a lot of potential, having been trained by Carl, and he's picked up a national championship. So she says about Valegro, he was small and squat, just over 16 hands. So for Carl, who is well over 6 foot, he was far from ideal. His canter was also so massive, it hurt Carl's back, which was already bad. Now, this is my focus of my doctorate, that we can expect some 80% of riders to be in pain and some 50+% of those who are in pain to be suffering with low back pain. Although that's not quite stated here, but back pain, wherever it is in the back, features highly as injury prevalence. So while his other paces were pretty normal to begin with, it was only in canter that Blueberry looked like such an amazing horse. Okay. Even before I arrived, Carl had already tried to sell him twice. So here she is. This is a real stroke of luck here, because right place, right time, got herself into the yard as a working apprentice, lands this great job with the top dressage rider in the UK and consistently appearing at the Olympics. And Valegro just happens to be available to her at that time. And because he found Blueberry, which is Valegro's stable name, uncomfortable to ride, he let Lucy have the ride on him, presumably another rider on the yard. Lucy is tiny, though, only 5'2", and Blueberry was starting to get too strong for her. Okay, so here we learn that he's not quite the perfectly willing ride. One day, a month or two after I arrived at Carl's, Lucy and I were having a lesson with him. Blueberry was pulling Lucy around like a rag doll. And as I'm taller than her at 5'6", Carl told us to swap. Lucy got on the horse I was riding, and I got on Blueberry. It sounds like she was another working pupil. From that first moment, I loved him, absolutely loved him. I think what she loved was the way he moved. He was fiery, he was sensitive, he was expressive. He was powerful. Everything I'd always wanted in a horse, he was. It felt like he was the missing piece I had been looking for. When you sit on Blueberry, you really feel like you're part of him because he's so solid and built like a barrel. Your legs wrap right the way round. The power was like nothing I'd ever felt in my life. When I asked for canter, it felt as if we were going to take off. The only thing I can compare it to is a roller coaster. It gave me that same thrill in the pit of my stomach, the buzz of going so fast, it was almost like losing control. And if you watch the first video, she certainly doesn't seem to be afraid of horses being out of control, because she is confident that she can sort them out, as she says earlier in the book. Even then, I could feel how much I could achieve with him, so fulfilling her ambitions. This was my perfect dance partner. But he was a head shaker, and it was so serious that Carl was beginning to think he might not even have a career. Carl had tried all sorts of medicines, had all sorts of specialists out, and had even thought about having Blueberry operated on. He was so sensitive to everything, nothing could touch Blueberry's skin. Metal buckles would sometimes give him a rash. Wonder why the noseband had to be fairly tight then, as in his photos there seem to be indentations on the nose and around the front of the face. You'd be with him and he'd be trying to bang his head or rub his face with his legs or drag his nose up the walls. That's awful. So was she, yeah, she was riding him at the time, even though he was severely uncomfortable. With time, we found out that putting Blueberry in a double bridle helped too. Normally, you put a double bridle on a horse when they're 6, coming 7, because until then, their teeth are changing. Blueberry was 5.5, but the curb chain definitely seemed to make a difference. It lies on an acupuncture pressure point, and although straightforward acupuncture hadn't worked for Blueberry, with the curb chain on, he did seem to be more relaxed. What's more, it gave me more control over him. Blueberry was the kind of horse who, if he didn't feel like his rider was in charge, he'd start to worry. So, justification for this, possibly? So she's picked up that he's not quite as willing in that sense of his training, but that he needs something of a strong, determined, confident rider, perhaps. Which is not unusual for sport horses that are bred for sport. In March, Carl was due to be away in Spain for 3 weeks competing on what's known as the Sunshine Tour. It would be 3 weeks when I could focus on working with Blueberry and, I hoped, prove just how good he was. Chapter 6. It sounds funny, but the problem with Blueberry was that he tried so hard, always trying to jump ahead, and then when he didn't understand what I wanted him to do, he'd get tense. There were 2 arenas, indoor and outdoor. The indoor was smaller, so that's where I rode Blueberry with less space and 4 walls around him. It was easier to keep him under control. Okay, so she's working in a young horse in a small area, which was hard work for him. As well as working to make him more relaxed, I was also trying to get him more supple. Tension would make him tight, and while some horses get stiff in their mouths and necks, with Blueberry, it was his whole body that would go rigid. So to me, with my experience of training, conditioning, my academic knowledge, I wouldn't be surprised at this horse getting tense, being ridden in a small area. I just wonder how much relaxation he could get in a small area. Although she says I concentrated on lots of easy, basic transitions and simple exercises, from her perspective, things that he could cope with and wouldn't get him stressed. And the more relaxed he was, the better he got. So it sounds like he has some discomfort that she's trying to work through. Come on, Blueberry, I'd say every time I got on him. We need it to be a good day today. Well, with sound training methods, every day should be a good training day. Although, as she said earlier, horses can go through a phase of dental issues while their dentition is changing. But again, I don't see any reference to, I wonder if this horse is in pain. He's a strong, powerful horse. She hasn't got the confidence to ride him in a large arena. So he gets ridden in a small one because he's easier to control. By the time Carl came back, Blueberry was much more on the bit and not so stiff, and I'd also managed to slow down his canter. Well, you would in a small arena. Obviously, Carl wasn't about to give Blueberry to me. But after we talked, he agreed I could compete him at the lower levels, which, as an international rider, Carl couldn't do anyway. So, right place, right time. Carl couldn't ride him at lower levels, and probably if he could, he would. As Des, her horse, was a year ahead of Blueberry and that much easier to ride, it was easier for Carl to teach me new movements on Des and for me then to transfer what I'd learned to Blueberry. Okay, so she still has some gaps in her knowledge. So she needed to learn the moves on her own horse before applying them to Valegro. With him, I was also understanding the importance of timing. If you correct a horse, it has to be at the right moment. Because if you do it too late, the horse misunderstands. So presumably, in her abuse video, this is not the lesson she was applying there at all. That horse was being attacked. And she wasn't going to take the pressure off that horse at all, as in there would be a reward for doing something right. That horse had to guess what she wanted, but she seems to know here about horses misunderstanding punishment. But I'm the kind of person who always has to set myself goals. And when I got to Carl's, I set myself 3. The first was to ride on a team with him, Carl, because he was the best there was. The second was to ride at the London Olympia Horse Show, because that was the only major show that, as a child, I'd never managed to qualify for. But the biggest goal was to ride at London 2012. And I can't tell you how much I wanted it. Although I knew that just wanting it wasn't enough. If it was going to happen, I was going to have to go out and fight for it. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. Such as the horse, for example. And there's some photos here. She says she was never one for sitting still. And with Mum's passion for horses, it wasn't surprising that both my sister and I were hooked almost instantly. My first pony ride, aged only 6 months. This is a strange posture for the horse, hollowing its back with 2 children on it. And sitting on the dog's back. So here is her in her showing days. Here. And presumably working hunter, showing here. She's got some grass reins on. These are used to stop the usually ponies from stretching down to have a nibble of grass and yanking the weak child forward, but there doesn't seem to be much grass around on this concrete. More showing. So her sister and I didn't compete much against each other, but we still argued all the time about who'd won what. So really fierce sense of competitiveness here. What I've learned since is that you don't need those big paces in a young Grand Prix horse. just 3 correct paces that you can train. It's not often that horses who are really big movers and scoring 10s when they're young go on to have long careers, simply because of all the wear and tear on their bodies. So she's aware that horses can be injured and potentially retired early. Because he was so strong, I wasn't very confident that going backwards would be something he was going to agree to. Okay, so the horse had to perform a rein back. Anyway, Carl and I set about teaching him, me on Valegro standing next to a wall to keep him straight, Carl tapping his front legs with a whip, and eventually he managed to do it. But he was absolutely dragging himself. He was leaning his whole weight into my hand, and he was completely locked in his jaw. So I'm going to stop there for now, and I will come back shortly in a day or two and continue. I won't leave it a week this time. So once again, thank you for watching, and you'll see me soon.